morning, everybody. Welcome to the Planning Community Development Committee. We have 3 items. With me on the committee today is April Barker, and subbing for Dan Hamill is Roxanne Murphy. The first item is review of key concerns from the June 6, 2016 public hearing on the draft 2016 Bellingham Comprehensive Plan. Go ahead, Rick.
All right, members of the council. Today we'd like to give a quick update based on some of the issues that were identified at the public hearing. I'm joined by Lisa Poole and Greg Alcott. Lisa will join me in presentation in a moment. As council will recall, key issues raised at June 6th meeting and its public hearing were associated with land supply and housing affordability, ADUs and their appropriate type and location in the city, inclusionary zoning, whether the city should consider policies that would support some future consideration of it, and transitory development, the issues associated with studying potential transit corridors. Most of those issues I think we addressed both in the tracker as well as in our presentation, but I'll focus on a couple of issues that were raised during the public hearing that merit some additional scrutiny. Clearly, one of the significant threads was dealing with single-family home ownership and home ownership in general. And this is an issue that is a profound change in America. We have seen a substantial drop in home ownership rates. That's due to a variety of things. I think we need to look at first broadly and see how those trends are nationally, and then look how those trends are amplified here. The first would be elevated underwriting standards. Council may not be aware, but school debt now is included in your underwriting assessment of your ability to afford homes. And since we've abandoned our educational process to some degree, we've now passed that on to our children, and they're less likely to be able to qualify for mortgages. Additionally, there is a significant change in home ownership views from many young professionals and those starting out. A lot of it comes from having survived the Great Recession and some concern about their future, their need to be mobile and to relocate, and we're seeing a less likelihood to commit early on. I mean, that's coupled with a lot of societal change trends too, like marriage being delayed and other things going on. Public education, since 2008, we've seen a significant erosion of support, government support of public education. And there is a correlation between achieving high degrees of education and home ownership. That's a direct and causal correlation. And essentially, as a society, as we invest less in education, we're creating less opportunity for folks to achieve ownership. And finally, I think to some degree, is the new majority. By mid-century, we will be a nation characterized by a majority of minorities. And unfortunately, we are still divided in terms of an income gap, and those who are a minority are far less likely to qualify for home ownership itself. So the world is changing. I wish it were a simple problem that one magic bullet could fix, but we work in a universe where there's a variety of factors that contribute, and we need to see that sort of broadly, nationally, and then again look more locally on how that would go through. Example.
Hang on, go ahead, Roxanne.
One other thing I really wanted to add to the list, one of the problems we have here in so many places is just a simple word, inventory. We need more inventory.
I'm going to talk about inventory in just a moment, and I'm going to refer to a very on-point discussion by Windermere Real Estate's economist, who discusses why we have a shortfall in the Northwest of inventory. There are approaches to address these changes. We're trying to find ways to provide alternatives to single-family homes, to large lot single-family homes, but are still single-family homes. We're also looking at to see if we can find a way of increasing development density in those areas that have services to reduce cost. Those are some of the approaches we're using at this point in time. There was significant concern about land supply. And again, I understand those who suggest that if looking for a solution, if we just increased our area, we'd have no problem because we'd have more affordable housing. I don't think that's the case. I'm going to quote the industry's own economists as they discuss this issue. Close-in housing will continue to appreciate. The economist for Zillow testified in front of the Seattle City Council, and we can provide you a link to that testimony. Very interesting. And they asked if really our prices are coming up because of low inventory or our prices are coming up because of desirability. And they said significant in-migration. We are underpriced compared to other areas in the West Coast. And we don't see prices dropping even with significant increases in inventory. A second is the outlying areas need system improvements in some extent to be able to develop. And while we were able to, as a community, afford those many years ago, it is troubling at this point that even with developers paying their fair share and covering their costs, the deficiencies in our own system spreads the burden to everyone else. You know, it's interesting where you heard testimony that that inclusionary zoning was unfair because it takes the burden for some and places it from one group of people onto another. Building in outlying areas takes the burden from that area and places it on all of us similarly. It's been demonstrated that service costs in public outlying areas are 2.5 times that in close-in areas. And finally, I think it leads to some of the real causes for where land supply is and what the challenges might be. The first is we have had stagnant wages. Home prices continue to rise in a very desirable market with continued in-migration, but wages haven't moved at all since 2008. Interestingly, another factor that's brought up is dealing with why there's no inventory per se. And Windermere Realty has a wonderful economist, Matthew Gardner, and he spoke on that. And his assessment is that the market is performing pretty well right now. That homes for sale, however, are historic lows. And he said it doesn't make sense because price typically motivates sellers. When you have low inventory, prices go up. You think people would take advantage of it. We discount greatly that there are significant issues and impediments to that. 1 in 5 homes are still underwater in terms of value from when they were purchased. Additionally, people move because they choose to. Only 1 in 4 folks move because they have to, for like jobs or for a bigger home to accommodate a growing family or for divorce or for other reasons. And that means that 80% of the folks move when they wish to. In some cases, 60 million homes were purchased right before the bubble burst. And those folks have recovered some of their equity, but not to the point where they're willing to go cast out into a market that's appreciating so dramatically. So their homes aren't coming on the market itself. 5 million nationwide owner-occupied homes went to rental. No significant change in how that worked. And builders have not stepped up, quite frankly, in this very dynamic and not predictable market to provide more product. It hasn't happened, and according to Mr. Gardner, it's not likely to happen this year itself. You know, another assertion that was raised was government fees are specifically those things that add the cost of housing and prevent folks from seeking ownership. Housing costs related to many factors, as we just discussed. If fees aren't charged, that means everyone would pay. Again, similar item. Some folks would benefit at the expense of everyone. Bellingham is in the middle compared to other communities for system development charges. And Bellingham is lower than the state average for its transportation impact fees. So I guess what I'd say is it's not as clear-cut. It's not as easy as perhaps portrayed. If it were as simple as expanding government land supply, letting that loose, if it was as simple as reducing fees, folks would have done it and it would have met a demand. But we're not seeing that in the state, nor are we seeing it nationwide. I'd like to turn this over to Lisa, and she'll follow through on some other comments regarding the public hearing.
Good morning, Lisa Pohl, Senior Planner. So just a few more concerns that were raised during the public hearing and through the comment tracker, through our written comments. Plan scope. There's been an assertion that the draft plan is indeed not just an update, that it's an overhaul from the existing plan. And we respond by saying that the plan changes do follow the previously approved scope that Council approved. And we are required by the state to develop new 20-year population employment forecasts and comply with new state rules and requirements. So the policy foundation is the same. About a third of new development is forecasted to occur in our urban villages, and the remaining will occur on vacant lands throughout the city and the urban growth area. New growth is projected to be split about a third single family and about 2/3 multifamily, and this is the same split that was identified in our 2006 plan. Regarding employment, I just wanted to touch on that. The 2006 plan allocated 62% of the county's total employment to Bellingham, which holds true today per the most recent state employment totals. And this is just a graph showing you the single-family, multifamily mix from 2006 to 2036. And once again, the projected 20-year single-family, multifamily mix is about the same that's identified in the 2006 plan. Regarding incentives, there was an assertion that incentives are transfers of payments from citizens to developers to bolster profits. And the city believes that incentives can help the city meet its goals and policies by directing development into certain areas where we want to see it occur. They're generally offered only to qualifying projects, and many are offered for a limited time period. The only direct financial commitment that we've committed to is for reduced permit fees for qualifying projects in downtown and Old Town. And council recently approved up to $250,000 per year for a 3-year period. This will support 2 to 3 projects a year. RS20 zoning, there was a comment made that areas with RS20 zoning should be rezoned to allow for more units per acre. I believe 4 units per acre was what was suggested. And no upzones are proposed with this comp plan update. The future projected growth can be accommodated with our current zoning and within our current urban growth area boundaries. Lastly, the infill housing toolkit. The assertion was that the toolkit should or should not be permitted in additional zones. And the toolkit was adopted at the end of the Great Recession in 2009. So initially it did have a slow start, but in recent years there's been much interest. Several applications are being processed and several more are complete, under construction, or in the pre-application stages. So the draft plan policy supports implementation of our current toolkit with no changes to the zones where it's allowed currently. Lastly, just wanted to show you again your upcoming review schedule. The next session on 6/27 is focused on land use and housing. And then here at this work session today, we wanted to know what information you needed to move forward during the upcoming review. And also, if you have any questions, we'd be happy to answer. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go any further, there's been a lot of discussion in the last week about transferring this comp plan work sessions from the Planning Committee of the Whole. I think it makes more sense to have it Committee of the Whole, where we all can be there at the same time. This is a big issue. Well, you're all here now, but that might not happen when you have work sessions. The only question is, next work session is June 27. It's an off Monday. So I'm going to make a motion, and when we're done, that we transfer this to Committee of the Whole. But on that day, that hearing is scheduled for 10:30 in the morning. I think all the schedules, can you put the schedule back up on the screen, Lisa, so we can see it? Because we're going to have to decide where the work sessions, when the work sessions are going to happen, whether it be in the afternoon or an evening, because the afternoon it's going to need an hour or 2 hours of discussion. So that's something that can be worked out by the council president and the rest of the council. We can talk about it more tonight. So we'll decide at the end of this. I'll make a motion that we take it to Committee of the Whole. Are there any other questions about the information we need for the next work session? Terry?
I'm not on the committee.
That's all right. Go ahead.
A couple things. One, on the one you've got scheduled for the 27th, I would like to request that if you could swap out that one for transportation, because I can't be there, and for me, that is the most important one. The others, I don't see a whole lot of complications, but that one, and I would really like to be present for that. So if that's at all possible, that we don't put the land use one and housing on that one, because I would really like to be part of that, or take part in it.
Michael?
Well, I understand why Terry's asking that, and I would ask not to do that for the very same reason, is because the 11th, I am planning to be gone in the morning when it might occur. Now, in the afternoon, if it's moved to the afternoon, when I was planning to be here during regular sessions, that might be fine.
Go ahead, Madam President.
I was just going to say, well, why don't we keep Terry, you can't be here. If we move the rest of them to regular committee of the whole, is the only one we need to arrange the 727 or 627? Is that correct? That's the
yeah,
only one, Terry,
yeah,
that you can't?
seems like it.
Everyone else can make that session?
So the question is, you want to do it at 1 in the afternoon, because it's a free Monday, or at the 10:30 in the morning? That's the only question.
Terry?
A
what's
free
your
Monday, I
schedule?
could make it at 1. I can't make it then, because I've got a medical appointment that I can't change.
Yes.
Okay.
At 1 o'clock?
Michael?
So if we move to committee of the whole, they'll all be in the afternoon, not the morning? Okay, that's easier
Yes.
for me to make then.
All right.
Yes. Except the 627, which
Yeah.
we're asking right now
Terry.
clarification for 1 at 1 PM on that day.
Is there, Rick, a problem with putting something else on besides the housing, the first one? Greg, the first one, can you mix it around a little bit?
Yeah, no, we'll be
Okay.
here. We'll be here.
Okay. Terry?
And on questions for them, one of the questions that came up that wasn't really, it was kind of addressed about ADUs, but one question that came up was why under, you've got a policy of H14 or 15 about continued implementation of the countywide housing, the chat recommendations. And that came up then, and about why is that being used as that's outdated. But this one isn't, there's got to be some mistake in it, because I helped chair the chat committee, and the chat committee and the council at the time did not recommend detached ADUs as part of their recommendations. That was not part of it. We did not approve that. In fact, we vehemently opposed the council, so I don't know why that would be,
Okay.
why would we use that? And that was one of the questions that came up from people.
Mayor.
And I didn't see that addressed.
Go ahead.
I haven't had a chance to talk to Director Sepler about this, but it was my understanding when we had the first go-round that at least from the mayor's office perspective, it was from the Community Solutions Work Group that looked at chat and took what was appropriate and not appropriate out of chat. So it wasn't necessarily implementing what chat said, it was talking about implementing the recommendations of the Community Solutions Work Group, but I think there's some confusion about that. And Director Sepler's been ill, so I haven't had a chance to talk to him. So I understand what you're saying, Terry, but I'd like a chance to talk to Rick.
Because that
about it.
didn't come out of it. I can guarantee you that. I made sure that didn't happen.
So is that,
Okay.
okay?
And it shouldn't, so those references to that shouldn't be in here.
Pinky?
I just want to support the thought that we need to consider the possibilities. It doesn't mean that they have to be everywhere, but I think it should be part of our plan to have that as a consideration.
Okay. Michael?
Just going to what we'd like to maybe talk more about when it comes back, I really appreciated bringing in the idea of what economists are saying on these issues. I've been looking into this a lot and talking with Hart Hodges, for example, to kind of bounce off, what is different about the housing market. And one of the things that he identified is that the housing market really is quite different from other markets. Goods don't move around like milk or, butter. Land doesn't move to satisfy market demand. No new land is created. It's a peculiar market. Most of the owners of supply don't want to sell. Even if prices go up, people want to stay in their houses. Their house goes up, but they don't just sell it for that reason. So the supply side of the market is mostly owned by people who have no interest in selling. That's, again, a peculiarity. There's no price sensitivity when prices go up because I still keep my house. I'm not going to sell it. Housing prices have been inflated over the last few decades by cheap money policies. In no other area do we give tax deductions for your interest, and in no other area do we have 30-year financing. And it's hard to explain. People are sensitive to the monthly price, their payment price, not the total price of the house. If you can get someone for a cheap monthly payment, they'll buy a more expensive house. That leads to inflationary pressures. New inventory is rarely added to the lower end of the market. So again, the economics of housing is peculiar in that the middle and higher end, they usually are healthy, but the lower end, we worry about affordability, isn't built. There's no profitability in that sector. So again, the housing market is quite different, and also lowering cost to the builder doesn't necessarily lower the price. Builders don't sell the house for less, they just keep the profit more, and that's good. That the profit is good to them, but it doesn't affect the final price because that's set by supply and demand. Sellers don't undersell and buyers don't overpay. That's just the way it is. And also, oversupply is rare circumstance because housing is added as prices go up, but housing isn't kept being added when prices go down. Your farmer has got a lot of milk and they got to keep selling it, and they'll sell it for a lower and lower price. Even when their profit turns negative, they've got to get rid of their milk or dump it. Houses aren't the same. You can just stop building. You can just stop selling. So the supply side is very peculiar. Only 1% to 2% of housing is new. That's the only real market. The 98% sits there, not necessarily entering the market. So I guess my whole point is high housing prices is affected by so many things over which the city has no control. I'd like us to focus on the few things where we can control, and I want to identify those. And that's where I think, that's where I think our focus should be. We're not going to solve housing affordability, a nationwide problem, but we can solve key parts of it. And so I want to focus on finding what we can affect because we're not going to control the market.
Okay. Pinky.
For the land use and housing things, a couple of things that I'd like to see is, one, I will admit that I am still very concerned. I feel like we have a housing crisis, and saying 1/3 single family and 2/3 multifamily makes me nervous, because if that was okay in 2006 and we don't have any houses now, obviously something needs to shift. We need more single family, and I'm concerned that our lots, that they might be exaggerated in regards to how many lots we actually have, what the restrictions are actually on those lots, and what the real numbers are of how many houses we can actually build on those. So those are the things that I'd like to look at in land housing. But I'd like an assessment of actually where all the utilities are now that we could actually build out to the possibilities and what those numbers are, because I think that there are stats on both sides to prove both points here in regards to multifamily and in regards to single family, but the most obvious thing is we don't have any houses in Bellingham, so that's the thing that I'm looking at right dear and near to me. So those are the things that I'd like to see in our land use and housing.
Terry?
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and Michael's especially too, about, I would like to also have more discussion on the land use. The arguments about if we only bring in these urban growth areas, my concern is with those urban growth areas that are left, we have no easily buildable land supply. This is not the Midwest. This is not Texas, where you can bring in a couple square miles, divide it up into neat little squares, and use every lot. The lots that we have available in those urban growth zones are filled with wetlands, hills, and very tough terrain for most of it. So the idea that we would bring that in and all of a sudden there's going to be affordable housing, well, come on. That's not going to happen. They're not going to bring them in as affordable housing. Even if there are some easy buildable lots, if people know they can get a higher price, that's what they're going to charge. It's not coming down in Bellingham. In Bellingham, we're out of easy buildable things, and that does concern me. So we end up having to look at infill and other kinds of things. And I would like to have some more discussion. It keeps coming up because we never did bring an ADU ordinance forward, which should have been done prior to this so people would know. But if planning wants to continue pushing detached ADUs in areas, I would like to see some criteria discussed and established, such as limited to low-density neighborhoods, low-density neighborhoods, and that would allow, where they'd be allowed, instead of attempting to push into the old neighborhoods that are very high density, small lots. So limiting that on the small lots, high density neighborhoods. And so I would like to have that as part of the discussion. If we're going to discuss continued, discussion about these detached ADUs, I would like to have some discussion about those kind of criteria of where and how that would be done.
Okay, Greg and Rick, by looking at the review schedule, what do you think you can bring forward on the 27th so people know what we're going to talk about?
I don't see Ted here, but I'll check with him.
Okay.
I don't know any reason why we couldn't just swap transportation and capital
Okay,
facilities.
that sounds
And
good.
do that on the 27th.
Why don't we do that? Okay. Is there anything else? Yes, April.
I think as we go forward and talk about inclusionary zoning, of course, planning is not my background, so I'd like to understand a little better of why we need to mandate inclusionary zoning. That implies to me that we have some exclusionary zoning, and that's reasons why we might need to push for inclusionary zoning. But because I don't have a good background in zoning, I would like to understand better of why we might need to do it this way versus the suggestion of a carrot and looking at those areas that might be exclusionary and figuring out how we can build inside those, or do we even have those? Does that make sense?
Sure, we can give backgrounds on it. The policy was to consider inclusionary zoning. As I understand it, there was a fairly good assessment done, and the numbers didn't work for Bellingham at that time. And as I understand the motivation, it was just to strike even looking at the future at that as a tool. That's really the issue. Do you want to consider it or not? Similar to ADU. ADU has no mandate for attached or detached. It said, should we consider it in the future? And again, the testimony has been to strike it. It's not a good tool to use.
Okay, anything else?
Jane?
Yes, ma'am.
Brian just said Ted's fine with making that switch.
Transportation. Okay, so just to make that clear, that'll be Monday the 27th at 1 p.m. Transportation and capital facilities. So I will move now that we take the comprehensive plan revisions and work sessions out of the planning committee and send them to committee of the whole.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Any discussion on that? All those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. Thank you, gentlemen, and everybody for this. And as far as the rest of the schedule, that'll be a work in progress, and I'm sure Pinky will figure that out. So. Okay, thank you. We'll go to our next item, potential revisions to the city commercial zoning code.
Council members, at your desks, as you came in, we have the final draft provided to you. We sent you it's the final report. We sent you a draft owing to the fact that the quarter ended last Friday and we received all the materials just in the nick of time. We do have those available for you. What I can suggest is that in reviewing the recommendations from the University of Washington graduate students, there seemed to be a number of opportunities that were low-hanging fruit. These were things that were technical in nature or could involve us looking more comprehensively at some existing consolidations of regulations rather than repetition. And we are going to pursue those because they seem that they would be able to give us great traction, be able to meet the intent of the code without changing the high-quality standards we maintain, but provide greater accessibility. And towards that end, this summer, we will brief the Planning Commission on the full process, because ultimately, a number of provisions, if you consolidate from one section to another, it involves Planning Commission review and public hearing and council review and public hearing. Let's bring them up to speed on the background to date. We will work with Code Publishing to ascertain the cost of switching the way we host the land use section. One of the surprising issues identified was that there are alternative ways of doing your code online. And it's a service they do provide. We need to find out the cost of both conversion and also the hosting. But if we could go to a more modern format, at the very least, it'll eliminate hunting for definitions, and at the best, it'll provide good linkages for standards. So you wouldn't have to keep turning from section to section. You'll be able to hyperlink to them. Finally, we'll do the detailed work of looking through all of the zoning tables and the special conditions, and find those special conditions that occur over and over again. If we see it occurring for virtually every area, it means it really should be a standard applied to all properties. So we'll identify that, provide the provenance where they came from, and that'll be the starting point for our amendments to the zoning code to consolidate them as standard development standards. We'll give you an update going into fall on the progress on that, and our hope would be to begin late summer, early fall to start working on those development standards with the Planning Commission and start setting the stage for the design guidelines that came out of the zoning tables, in a sense, as becoming a part of a design process and seeing how they may work. So I'm happy to answer any questions on the
Rick,
implementation.
is this available to the public?
Yes, we're putting it online right now.
Okay, I think it's an absolutely wonderful report. I mean, I think they really did a great job. Roxanne?
I just wanted to say it's so wonderful that we've gotten so much assistance with this, and I really appreciate it, because this has actually been one of my dreams of something that I have wanted to do personally, finding the time to review the codes in this way and such a thoughtful way, in ways that we can consolidate things, make it easier, make it more reliable and consistent. I'm just really grateful that we got the support to do this, and I thank you for giving us the idea of working with the college students. They get good experience. They help improve our city, so thank you.
Michael?
I'd just like to go on record to say that I'm strongly supportive of the first three recommendations, especially the third one, the finding the common elements and putting it all in one place. I'm also favorable to the last three, but I do have slight questions about number 4, establishing a commercial design review process, kind of citywide for all commercial properties. That's adding a layer of review, but it seems to me that what you want to do is also take something away. So it's replacing something, not adding one more thing on top. You add this instead of that. Is that correct? What are we taking away if we add that process instead?
I think you're spot on in the sense that we have a number of those standards, but they're buried in the code in different ways. So the key would be to consolidate it, and there needs to be varied design review. A infill project in existing area that's not historic should be facilitated. It's more of a checklist. But a key location in our commercial center or in one of the historic districts should clearly be subject to a little higher level of review. I think the sense here is to provide guidance and make it just part of zoning for much of our commercial development, but find that middle tier that's missing now. We do big box. We do design review in Fairhaven, for example, in the urban villages. But we're missing sort of that middle tier that also has a significant effect. I think we need to see what comes out of zoning. There's hidden design in all our zoning rules. And we really should take a look at that and say, are we just really having design review that's just enforcing those, but putting them all together so somebody sees the totality of it? So in a sense, we might take out some of the confusion of how to meet the the requirements, because they're widely dispersed.
Well, so that's what I would hope for. I generally favor design review as a way of ensuring there's no conflicts in character. We do it pretty well and no conflicts of use. But I wouldn't want to just add more rules if we're actually simplifying and streamlining and removing something before we add something in, so the net isn't more process, but just better process, then I think I would be happy to see what happens for that one.
Roxanne?
I was just wondering if this would help inform other zoning too. For all the
I think
zoning
so.
that we do.
I think there's an opportunity to learn from this process. If we're successful, it's been a good way, a good exercise. It's replicable. We could look at some of our own other zoning districts and say, can we consolidate? Can we be more efficient? As council will recall, this came out of the lean process, which is take that critical look and say, you're asking in 5 different places, couldn't you ask in 1? and that's more efficient, it avoids waste, and that's what we're trying to do.
Anything else? Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We will now go to the last item, which is adoption of the 2015 Washington State Building Code with local amendments.
Good afternoon, Kurt Nabafeldt, Planning and Community Development Department. As you recall, on June 6th, we brought forward changes to the building codes. As you know, part of the revised Code of Washington, we are required to adopt the 2015 Washington State Building Code on July 1st. Mr. Tinner, our building official, attended the June 6th meeting, kind of gave you an overview of some of the changes that were going to be made, and based on that, we're bringing forward the ordinance that will implement that, so we're requesting your vote on that ordinance to move it along.
Committee. Go ahead, April.
Is this where I move to adopt?
That's what you do.
All right, move to adopt the 2015 Washington State Building Code with local amendments.
Okay, motion been made. Is there any discussion? All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion carries. And that is the last item on the agenda. We are adjourned.